You came out of a perfectly ordinary country background. Yet at the age of 16, you were a general. You were commanding an army and doing it brilliantly. You drove off a force of mercenaries who'd invaded your country. At 17 and 18, you were a key advisor to your king. At 19, you were sold out for cash to your country's enemies. And this whole incredible story has always been explained in terms of divine intervention, but I put it to you that there are perfectly natural, human, rational explanations for what happened to you. And I ask you, Joan of Arc, if you'll collaborate with me in honestly investigating some of those possibilities. Will you?
Certainly.
Joan, you were called a great many names.
Yes, mainly by the English.
But by others, too. At home, you were known as Joan. You were called Joan of Arc. You were called Saint Joan later in 1920 when this marvelous event happened, the creation of your sainthood.
Yes.
Another thing that you were called was the Maid.
Yes.
Were you?
The maid?
Yes.
Are you asking me if I was a virgin?
Yes.
Well, that's a much more direct question. Why don't you ask that one?
Were you a virgin?
Yes, I was.
Despite the fact that you went into the field with your soldiers, slept among them?
Well, sleeping among your soldiers does not necessarily mean sleeping with your soldiers, does it?
Of course not. Did you have normal sexual feelings growing up as a young girl?
That is a question I don't wish to answer for you, insofar as it has nothing to do with what I was or what I became.
Of course it has to do with what you were and what you became, because you made a great thing out of the fact that you were a virgin. You were a maid.
Yes, but...
Pure.
Right.
Now, if you had no sexual feelings...
You asked me about sexual feelings.
Yeah.
Sexual feelings are not the same as having sexual relations.
Of course they're not.
All
But
right.
if you had no sexual feelings, then there'd be nothing extraordinary
You
about
can
you
have
being a
sexual
virgin.
feelings without having sexual relations.
You remained a virgin. Why?
My voices had instructed me to remain a virgin.
You talk of voices. Anyone in this century talking of voices will be sent to a psychiatrist.
Do you think so?
I think so. Is it possible that you were not quite sane? That you imagined the voices?
Anything is possible, isn't it? I believe that
I'm
I was
asking-
quite sane. You're asking?
Yes, I'm
sorry.
asking for
Yes.
truth.
The truth is, I heard voices. Voices came to me when I was 13. I heard them until I was burned at the stake. For me, it was a real happening. Therefore, it is truth. Truth in my head.
Whose voices?
It first came to me the voice of St. Michael, and then later, St. Catherine and St. Margaret. St. Michael told me they would come later to instruct me, and they did.
Is it conceivable that you invented these voices?
No, it is not conceivable. Not to me, it isn't.
Let's begin with your birth. The story is that you were born in 1412 in the town of Domremy. Is that true?
Yes, it is true.
You believe it to be true?
I believe it to be true, to the best of my knowledge.
I have evidence that it was not true.
Where does this evidence come from?
It comes from a number of historians who recount that at the time of Epiphany in 1408, 4 years earlier, that there was a torchlight parade into your town to the house of your supposed father, Jacques d'Arc, and that the villagers scurried to and fro trying to figure out what was going on, and that in fact a baby was brought from Paris. Do you know that story?
Yes, indeed, I know that story. It is not a true story. It is a legend that grew up many years after I had been burned, that I was of royal blood, in fact, the daughter of Louis of Orleans and the Queen.
That you were an illegitimate daughter who had been
Yes.
spirited out of Paris to prevent scandal to the
Fascinating,
Queen.
isn't it, Mr. Watson? It is not true.
There's more evidence when you first went to court. You seemed at home there. You recognized the king, although he was trying to hide himself from you. The king gave you a coat of arms. He gave you the arms of the family of Orleans, in
A
fact.
very ordinary thing to do for anyone. I was going into battle, and I was allowed a coat of arms. I did not make the choice.
It seems to me, then, that you saw yourself as a messenger of God. What was the message?
I did not see myself as a messenger of God. Through the angels, I was told that I must go to the king and that it would be my duty to persuade him to help me save France, that was my duty. And the first thing that I must do is go to the king and get an audience with him and persuade him to let me do this, which is exactly what I did. This was the message that was given to me among other messages from the angels.
Look, I'll tell you what it is that's so frustrating to me talking to you about your voices. Here you were, a girl just going into puberty, 13 years old. It's an upsetting time. You indulged in fasting. It was springtime. You worked hard. Your country was in semi-ruins around you. It was a time of anxiety. You never knew when the soldiers were going to come through. It's exactly the kind of circumstance that can generate in a young mind hallucinations. And you won't even concede the possibility. I'm not asking you to say that's what it is. You won't even concede that was a possible explanation for those
Mr. Watson,
voices.
I will not concede it no more than you seem to be able to concede to the fact that what I say is true. All of the things that you say are valid. In my case, they are not. You continually want to anger me about something that I refuse to be angry about. What?
I'll say it's possible. I'll say I can accept the possibility that your voices were real, but you can't even accept the possibility that they were generated by psychological factors.
No.
There are tens of thousands of case histories of kids just like Joan.
Are there tens of thousands of case histories of Joan, who did what I did through God? Or are there tens of thousands of cases of people who heard voices who did not do what I did?
You were at the right place at the right time.
That is what you say, then.
Okay, let me try and get from you a picture of the life of this Joan in this village who heard these so-called voices.
Before that, my life was in many ways very ordinary, except you are aware that the war had been waging, the 100-year war had been waging for 70 years at the time of my life as a child.
Did that touch you directly?
Yes, indeed. In our village, we had Englishmen often coming into our village. At one time, our whole village left to go to another village because we heard the English were coming, and we took our cattle and we went to another place and we stayed for a length of time. And when we came back, some of our houses were burned and our churches.
I put it to you that you imagined the voices because you wanted to start to play a role in your country's future, that you imagined them or created them. You had seen the armies going through. You'd seen the English. You'd come to hate them. You wanted to do something about that.
Well, you are certainly not the first person that has put that to me, but it is not true. I can only repeat it as I repeated over and over and over until I was tired, that it is not true what you say. But you can only say it to me. Of course, you have that right.
It may be that you wanted so badly
Here you go
to
again.
drive off those English,
Yes.
to help your king, whom you believed was appointed by God to rule your country, that in fact you heard them, but you heard them out of the depths of your desire and your imagination.
What do you want me to say, Mr. Watson? Do you want me to agree with you? That would be easy. I can't do that because it is not true. There may be many more interesting things to talk about. You are taking an attack, which you believe, but you cannot break down what I believe in, what happened to me.
What did happen then? What did you hear? What did you see? What was it like when these so-called voices came to you?
It happened, as I've said, when I was 13. It was summer. The very first time I was in my father's garden. It was noon. I heard the voices around noon. It came from the direction of the church, which was in the direction of my right hand, and there was a light. After that, the voices always came with a light. It was sometimes a very great light. I recognized it as the voice of an angel. I heard it 3 times, and I recognized it as the voice of Michael, the archangel.
How could you know?
How could I know? How could I know what?
That it was Michael the archangel?
I never questioned it. After the 3rd time,
Did you see?
I saw Michael.
Did you touch?
Yes,
He was physically there?
yes, he had wings.
The saints, Catherine,
Margaret,
came also in physical
Later.
form?
yes.
Now, what did these visitors tell you?
Well, at first, Michael only told me that I should be a good girl, that I should go to church, and that I should listen to my family. He also said that St. Catherine and St. Margaret would come later and give me fuller instructions, which is, of course, what happened.
That sounds like pretty ordinary stuff to bring a saint or an archangel all the way from heaven.
But he was only preparing me for the future.
I get a bit of an impression that home life was kind of harsh. You worked hard all day. Was your father a demanding man?
In many ways, yes, he was. He demanded a lot of me as a youngster, very differently than my mother, who was rather gentle and taught me a good many things about keeping a home.
And he was terribly involved and concerned about you in some way. He had a dream about you running off with the English, is that right?
No. My father had a dream about my running off with soldiers. Certainly not in the way that it happened. And at the time, of course, my voices were visiting me and talking to me and telling me the plans that they had in store for me. But this was not the dream my father had. He simply had the dream of my running off with soldiers, which of course made him very, very angry. As you can know, at a time like that, we were Catholic, very religious, and my father felt very strongly about such things, and he threatened to drown me. He also threatened that if I weren't there, my brothers could do it for him.
It's conceivable that in such a situation of stress, a young girl would start to imagine things.
Again, you repeat that again, yes. You keep harping back to that, and I reply again to you. It is really not the important part of what we're talking about. It is something that you lay a great deal of stress on. You're shaking your head. Mr. Watson, what are you doubting now? First it was my birth, then it was my voices, my sanity, and perhaps even my...
It's such a story. A 16-year-old child virtually comes up from the country, has an audience with the king, tells him that she's come with a message from God, that he must give her an army, that she will save France, and he believes her. Why shouldn't I shake my head?
Well, you make it sound very simple. It was not a simple thing. The voice started when I was 13. I did not go to the king until I was 16. I was at the king's for almost 6-7 weeks. I was thoroughly examined by theologians and physically examined as well. It did not take just a few minutes for me to stand in front of the king and say, I am from God and therefore believe what I say.
And yet he believed you.
Eventually he
believed this little girl.
Yes, he did eventually.
Why?
Because I was sent from God.
Yes, I thought you were going to say that. I thought you were going to come back to this divine intervention thing. Is it possible?
Do you believe in God?
I'm not sure.
Well, then it is very difficult for you to understand what it means to someone who believes very strongly. You see, so it is easy for you to be doubtful, as it was very easy for people even who believed in God to be doubtful.
But I do believe in men, and I know how men act and think, and I think it's possible that he saw in you some kind of instrument, some kind of gimmick, some kind of device that might somehow make his troubles get away and finally get him crowned, because he'd been waiting all these years to be crowned.
No. My king believed in me and he believed in God. He was a gentleman and he did it because he believed in me and he believed in God. I believe that.
But he was in a very difficult situation.
Yes, that's why I had been sent. I only repeat what I have told you before. If there was no difficult situation, I would therefore not have been sent. I would have had nothing to do. Is that not true?
Yes.
Because he was in a difficult situation, I was there to help.
Let me tell you what I think and see how you react to it. I think that you were a bloodthirsty, cruel, vicious person who in fact enjoyed slaughtering hundreds and thousands of soldiers.
You intend to make me angry with that statement?
Yes, I do.
I cannot be angry with it. I was none of those things. I was instructed by God to do what I did. I never killed anyone.
You didn't kill anyone yourself, but you ordered the slaughter.
You cannot make me angry after the fact. It was done by God through me.
How can you explain a God who orders you?
I do not have to explain. Perhaps I cannot explain. It is simply that he did, and it was what I was told to do, and I did it to the best of my ability. I cannot argue with God.
The fields were swimming in blood.
I cannot argue with God.
By your own account, where is the compassion of Christ?
I cannot argue with God.
You sound like the Nazis at Nuremberg who said we were obeying orders.
I do not see that it is the same thing. Did they ever speak about God? Were there orders from God? The Nazis at Nuremberg, were there orders from God?
Did you understand your God to be a God who could order the death of thousands of people?
It did not concern me that he ordered the death. He gave me something to do, and I did it.
And you
it's
were
not
not
something that concerns me.
And you were not cruel?
No.
You wrote a letter to the English. You said, go
Very
away.
arrogant letter, yes. Do you really want to go into it?
Yes, I do.
All right.
I want to remind you what you wrote. You said, go away into your country, by God, and if so be not done, expect news of the maid who will come to see you shortly, to your very great injury. King of England, if you do not so, I am chief of war. And in whatever place I attain your people in France, I will make them quit it willy-nilly. And if they will not obey, I will have them all slain. Those are cruel words, John.
Yes,
Clark.
but there is also part of that letter that says that if they would give back to me the keys of the city, if they would return to me what rightfully belonged to France, they could go free. We would have no blood slaughter. But they did not, and therefore I did what I said I was going to do.
People don't commonly react well to threats and ultimatums.
No.
If the God who directed you was capable of giving a country girl the brilliance to command a huge army, could he not give her the brilliance to bring people together around the table of discussion and
I do
agreement?
not question God.
You were tried. The English said you were a witch. You were tried on charges of heresy. Men who held holy office in your beloved church said you were a heretic.
That is true, Mr. Watson. What do you want me to say to this? It is something that I went through. It is all true what you are saying.
But isn't this a terrible thing for your church to have done to you? Where was God then, acting
I
through
have
his
told
church?
you, God did not let me know what he had in mind for me to do. I have to accept what he did. It was in the plan of things, and that is what I accept.
Then when they made these accusations, and after they'd made them several times and questioned you at great length, they wrote out for you a recantation, and you signed it. And I want to read to you some of the words that were on that recantation. I confess that I've seriously sinned in dishonestly feigning to have had revelations and apparitions from God, from the angels, from St. Catherine and St. Marguerite, in seducing others, in believing foolishly and lightly, in making superstitious divinations, in blaspheming God and his saints, in going beyond the divine law and the Holy Scriptures and the canon law, in wearing disgusting clothes contrary to the decency of nature. I'm going slowly because I'm translating from the French as I read. But after all these years and months of your voices, then you said it wasn't true, and you made your mark, an X.
I was frightened, Mr. Watson. Do you understand what it means to be afraid? I had been held for a number of months, brutally attended to. They took me to the square. They read many things to me, and in a moment I lost my head. Paper was given to me, and I signed it. I do not read, Mr. Watson. I never learned how to read. I did not know what I signed. I signed out of fear.
What had they done to frighten you? What had they told you was going to happen to you?
I had been taken to the torture chamber to see what might be done. I was constantly, day after day, never left alone in my cell. I was questioned over and over and over. I did not even have time to listen for my voices sometimes because I was kept constantly being questioned. I was brutalized in many ways. I was not given a bed. I was not given help. I was not given food. There was even a time when I thought that someone was trying to poison me. I was terribly afraid, and I was young, and I lost my head. I can explain it in no other way to you.
They say that the bishop came and brought another woman with him, concealed somehow into your cell, spirited you away by a tunnel.
Yes.
And that the woman
Burned
who
her.
was burned was not Joan.
That is a story I have heard. There is no truth in that story, certainly. I was taken on the day I was told what was to happen to me. I was taken in a wagon and tied to a stake, a plaster stake, because you see wood burn. much more quickly. I was tied with chains, not ropes, because ropes would give way, and I would fall down. It was something that people wanted to see very much, this thing that was to happen to me. I stood on stones. There was wet straw underneath me, because damp straw, you see, tends to create smoke, and what you die from is suffocation, and it is much longer than a quick fire, which is over quickly, and this was something that wanted to be stretched out. I had a chimney above my head, which also creates a great draft and makes things go up. I asked for a cross, and an English soldier, I'm sure you've heard this many times, an English soldier made me a cross out of two sticks tied together with a piece of string, and I put it under my dress next to my body. And I asked that a cross be held up high so that I could see it, as you can understand the flames raised. So I asked that this would be held, and someone held it for me, and that's all I remember.
Forgive me, I know that I've been bothering you with, almost badgering you with modern historians. But there's one more that I need to have your assessment on, and here's a man who wants to take away from you even the satisfaction of having given your life for what you believed in. He's a modern historian. He says that you were not burned at the stake. He says that the bishop in charge went to her cell before her execution. He was alone with her for a few hours, supposedly hearing her confession, supposedly giving her last rites, but actually the bishop put another woman in her place. Joan escaped through a secret passage, turned up at another town several years later, and had children. He says the woman who was taken to the stake wore a dress. You didn't wear a dress. He says the woman who was taken to the stake wore a head covering that hid her face so that no one could tell if it were you. He says the woman taken to the stake didn't say anything when her sentence was read. You would have said something. You were never quiet about things. He says the woman at the stake was not stripped and tortured, as was the custom, because if she had been stripped, they would have seen that you didn't bear your battle scars. He says that there were thousands of English soldiers blocking the view of the French townspeople because they didn't want the French to see that it really wasn't you that was burned. There's no truth to any of that, is there?
No, Mr. Watson, there is no truth to such a thing.
The men who tried you, were they failures?
Failures in what? Because they did what they did to me, were they a failure? Mm-hmm. No. On the contrary, I believe they believed in what they did. I was at times arrogant, and at times angry and impatient, and even very rude, as was my nature to be that way. I was never a sentimental person. I do not believe they failed. They may have made a mistake. You talked of failure earlier, and I cannot consider myself a failure in any sense. As dying, sometimes people consider death a failure, which is, in a way, what I thought you referred to, because my dying was a part of a plan, a larger pattern of things that I had no knowledge of at the time. I find it somewhat vain and full of pride to look back, but I can, in the sense that I believe that through me and through what God asked me to do, part of France was reunited and eventually became a kingdom of its own. And that was very important to me at the time, and very important to God. So that when we talk of failure, we have to look at our lives in terms of what other people consider failure. Sometimes is not what we consider failure. I only hope that part of what I have been able to tell you, which is my truth, has made some impression upon you. I do not ask you, and I said this in the beginning, to believe what I say, but simply to understand that I am saying it out of my own beliefs. Have I made myself clear about the things I believe in?
Yes, I believe that you believe.
You just believe that I believe. I expect that's all I could ask for from a lot of people, isn't it?
I think that was what you were asking me in the first place, that I trust you.
Yes. You still have your own feelings about it, though.
Yes, but that's natural. I come from a world where the natural phenomena are what are trusted. You come from a world where God was what was trusted.
At times, God was trusted. You feel you no more, you trust God no more?
Our time does not trust God, nor indeed know God.
I'm very sorry for you then.